Hi, everybody. Hi, everybody. Coming to you from the Sears Family Outdoor Classroom. I tried the dining room. Johnny said that worked better. The dining room worked better. And then the kids realized there was better Wi-Fi in the dining room. They took it over. So now I'm in the yard. See, the wireless router's right there in that window, behind me in that window in the dining room. So I think, and I'm going to make this space like into my beautiful outdoor classroom. I'm going to landscape this thing. This is going to be amazing. Okay. So we're going to try this. All right. Time period 3 is a longer time period because it's the American Revolution. So it's going to be the French and Indian War, the American Revolution, and in addition to that, also the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, and then the Declaration of Independence, which is kind of small, actually. I know, that's funny, but compared to the other stuff. It's just, we declare independence. It's fun, but it is what it is. So let's get started because this is going to be a longer time period review. So what you guys are going to see is mine is actually a page and a half. So I have this page for the events, and then I have this. I have printed another one of those and have another half. Okay, so this is not the longest one. Time period 7 is very long. Time period 8 is long too, but you guys are not going to get to do that one. Sad face. That's one of the best time periods. It's okay. 1754. Let's get started for the time periods, for the times. Okay, the timeline. 1754, French and Indian War, 7 Years' War. It was called the 7 Years' War in Europe. It was called the French and Indian War on our continent. The French and Indian War is a misnomer because the Native Americans fought on both sides, but it is what it is. Proclamation of 1763, that's the one, once the French and Indian War is over, that is the one where the king is frustrated with the colonists scrapping with the Native Americans, so he issues the Proclamation of 1763 to tell them to stop going, declares the western frontier to be west of the Appalachian Mountains. So anything west of the Appalachian Mountains, Ohio River Valley, all of that is up for the Native Americans. And the colonists, it's one of their earliest grievances with the king because they felt like he was restricting their freedom. Really, he was just doing it for their protection. But, well, he said he was doing it for their protection. Right around there is also Bacon's Rebellion, which I don't have a date on, but you should make sure you have that in there. 1764 is the Sugar Act. 1765 is the Stamp Act. Now, we did a foldable on all of the acts of parliament. So you may want to find that foldable. Anytime I say we did a foldable, we did a chart, we did a thing on this, you might want to pull that and put it with your period review so that then you have the time period 3, you have your practice essay questions, you have any notes that you've done on a practice essay question, you have any charts, any maps, any foldables that we've done are with it, and then the period review is there too, so that you have this nice sort of encapsulated review packet. 1765 is the Stamp Act. The colonists react with the Stamp Act Congress. It's going to be the Sons of Liberty, led by Sam Adams and Paul Revere. 1768, there are British troops in Boston. In 1770, and 1768 is going to be why we sort of, the Quartering Act is passed, and that's going to be one of the major grievances that the United States, or not the United States, but the fledgling United States is going to have with the British. Let's see. 1770 is the Boston Massacre. Crispus Attucks was the first African-American casualty of the 7 that were killed. John Adams defended the British soldiers in the Boston Massacre, determining that they were engaged in an unlawful assembly. And those soldiers were acquitted. So that's an important thing to note. 1773 is the Tea Act. 1774 is the Intolerable Act / Coercive Act. 1774, Congress also halts the slave trade. 1775, Lexington and Concord. So the first shots of the American Revolution are fought before we declare independence. That's an important thing to note. And it's one of the reasons for us declaring independence, because what we're saying is, hey, we're already fighting this war. We can't actually get the supplies we need, because what are we going to do? Ask Britain for more troops or more rations or more weapons to fight Britain? That's not going to work. We're going to have to become resourceful and manage this thing on our own. 1775, the colonies rebel. 1776, Thomas Paine writes Common Sense. We read part of that. We read an excerpt of that. It's really, really important. Thomas Paine is really important, and he's also going to write The American Crisis, which is going to come up later. 1776, the colonies call for colonial self-government. 1776 is also when the Declaration of Independence is passed. So we were going to declare independence in 1776. 1777, we passed the Articles of Confederation. We have a chart comparing and contrasting the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution. Strengths and weaknesses of the Articles of Confederation versus strengths and weaknesses with the Constitution. That would be something that you're going to want to pull and probably put with all this. It tends to be very, very important. If it's not important for the AP exam this year, it will be important for AP Gov next year. So definitely pay attention to that. Let's see, 1777, the fighting at Valley Forge. That was the winter of Red Snow. The American colonists were having a really hard time. That the soldiers were having a really hard time. They were just like, they didn't have enough supplies. They didn't have enough food. There was a smallpox epidemic. Like, they were really struggling. And they didn't have shoes. That's the whole thing with the red snow, because their feet were like bleeding into the snow. And George Washington knew morale was low. People were deserting. So he had Thomas Paine write The American Crisis. And that's when Thomas Paine wrote, "These are the times that try men's souls," right? The Sunshine Soldier, and the Summertime Patriot, you know, that whole fair weather fan thing, shrink from this crisis. We'll shrink from this crisis. And that kind of boosted people's morale and helped the American troops turn a corner. In 1781, the Americans take the British surrender at the Battle of Yorktown. That's when We Live in a World Turned Upside Down by Hamilton. 1783 is the Paris Peace Treaty that ends the American Revolution. 1783, Shays Rebellion. Daniel Shays was in, you guys always got a little confused about this. Daniel Shays was an American Revolution war veteran who was also a Massachusetts farmer. When he returned home to his Massachusetts farm, he found that it was like all messed up and he didn't have money to fix it because we weren't really taking care of our veterans at this point in time. And so he asked for an audience with the Massachusetts governor, and the Massachusetts governor kind of refused him. And so since Daniel Shays was the captain of the Massachusetts militia, he led a rebellion. And this exposes a weakness in the Articles of Confederation because the federal government had no authority to put down the troops. So the federal government couldn't raise troops or put troops down. We were relying on state militias. And when the state militia is the one that decides they're going to rebel, you have a problem, right? So that's essentially what happened. Now, Daniel Shays' rebellion is going to expose a couple of issues. The first issue it's going to expose is obviously this weakness in the federal government, this weakness in the Articles of Confederation. But the other thing that it's going to show us is that is a continuity in United States history for a while, until the GI Bill is passed after World War II, that the American government doesn't really do a lot for veterans affairs. So that once veterans are done fighting in a war, they just kind of go home. And so fairly regularly, after wars, veterans will have issues adjusting to their life post-war and will protest the government. And so that's going to continue. That's going to be a continuity that's going to keep happening in that sort of post-war society in the United States. So it's an important thing to pay attention to. 1787 is the Constitutional Convention. They meet in Philadelphia. They decide, hey, I think we're going to go ahead and edit the Articles of Confederation. Then they realize the Articles of Confederation is going to be almost impossible to revise. So they scrap the Articles of Confederation entirely and go ahead and start writing the Constitution. 1787 is also the 3/5 compromise, which they add into the Constitution, or not exactly into the Constitution, but it's how they decide that people are going to be counted, where they say that they're going to count 3/5 of the slaves in a state for representation in Congress. 1787 is the Northwest Ordinance. 1787 is also the writing of the Constitution. And in 1787, the Federalist Papers are published. So this is going to be the whole conflict between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists over the ratification of the Constitution. We have a chart that we did on the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists. There's also a chart in AMSCO on that. So you probably want to go ahead and pull that chart and put it with this so that you can make sure that you understand the difference between a Federalist and an Anti-Federalist. The most important piece of that is really thinking federal government when you think about Federalists. The Federalists are in favor of a strong central government, hence the name federal. The Anti-Federalists are wanting to preserve individual freedoms because they are worried about having too strong of a central government. So with the constitutional debate, the Anti-Federalists are very concerned that the Constitution that we have written is too strong. It doesn't do enough to protect individual freedoms. So what they decide, the compromise that they decide on, is to add the Bill of Rights. Okay, so in 1788, the Constitution is ratified. In 1789, George Washington is inaugurated. In 1791, Alexander Hamilton sets up his vision for the Fed, the Federal Reserve, the banking system. In 1792, the Bill of Rights is adopted. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution that is designed to protect individual freedoms. That was to make the anti-federalists feel more confident that the government that we had created would, in fact, protect people's individual freedoms. In 1793, Thomas Jefferson resigns as Secretary of State. In 1794, the Whiskey Rebellion happens. Alexander Hamilton decided that it would be a good idea to place an excise tax on whiskey. Wasn't a good idea. People started to rebel. George Washington used his authority as the commander-in-chief of the armed forces to put that rebellion down. Some people said he used too much force to put down the Whiskey Rebellion. I think they said it was like hitting a gnat with a sledgehammer. So, but still. So a lot of times people will hold Shays' Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion side by side to kind of compare them or contrast them. In 1796, John Adams is elected as the second president of the United States. That election is a very tenuous election. And because John Adams got the most number of votes and Thomas Jefferson got the second most number of votes, Thomas Jefferson becomes John Adams' vice president. So therefore, we have two members. We have a president and vice president that are not of the same party. From that point going forward, we start going with the presidential ticket, where you just elect a president and a vice president together. Let's see, 1797 is the XYZ affair. That's John Adams deciding he doesn't like French people and getting pissed off about it. 1798 is the Alien and Sedition Acts. People were criticizing John Adams. Alexander Hamilton was criticizing John Adams in the newspaper, and he didn't like it, so he said, "You're not allowed to criticize me in the newspaper," which is not true. You are allowed to criticize the president in the newspaper, but okay. So he tried to pass that. He also didn't like French people because the French Revolution was going on. And so he was trying to keep those revolutionaries from like leaving and coming to the United States. So he passed the Alien Enemies, basically like the Alien Act, where he's saying like, oh, we're restricting immigration. This is a continuity in United States history. We are regularly restricting immigration. And in the larger picture, we're regularly talking about immigration. So it's going all the way back to 1798 when John Adams decided he didn't want French people in the country. 1798 is also the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions. Okay. All right, let's look at continuities. Okay, so for continuities, the first one that I have is political disagreement. Thomas Jefferson resigns is my specific example. The Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, the Democrats versus the Whigs. So that's all, the Jeffersonian Democrats versus the Whig Party. Another trend that I have is rebellions. So that's going to be the American Revolution, the Whiskey Rebellion, Shays' Rebellion, Bacon's Rebellion, all of that stuff. Political scandal is another one, the XYZ affair, and later on that could be connected to the Peggy Eaton affair, which is Andrew Jackson's political scandal. The sun is coming up and going to shine in my eyes in a minute. That's going to be really fun. Political protests, the Boston Tea Party, the Boston Massacre, the Stamp Act Congress, the Sons of Liberty, even the Daughters of Liberty, all of that could go on there. And that could later on be connected to the Vietnam War protests, the women's movement, the civil rights movement. I mean, the United States, we're full of political protesting. We love to exercise our First Amendment rights. It's one of our favorite things to do. I email politicians fairly regularly, as one does. So compromises, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, the Bill of Rights, and that could later on be connected to the Civil Rights Movement, the Compromise of 1850, the Missouri Compromise. Immigration issues, the Alien and Sedition Acts, and later on you could connect that to the Great Societies Immigration Act, which lifts quotas. You could to the Alien Enemies Act, the Alien and Sedition Acts from World War I, right? The Espionage and Sedition Acts, that's the one, Woodrow Wilson, and the Chinese Exclusion Act. Any questions? Ha! No, nobody has any questions? Okay, I'm moving on. Okay, political parties. The Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, changes. The political parties, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, the Jeffersonian Democrats versus the Whigs. Keep in mind that at this point, when Thomas Jefferson decides that he's going to run for president, he realizes that he cannot make a bid for president as as an anti-federalist. You can't be like, I want to be in charge of the federal government, but I'm against the federal government, right? So that's when he's going to change the name of his party to the Democratic Republicans. That part's pretty important and confuses some of you. So let's just think about that. New government is a change. The Articles of Confederation, the Bill of Rights, the Constitution, the Virginia and Kentucky resolutions, and the 3/5 Compromise. The French and Indian War is a change because it sours our relationship with Great Britain. Bacon's Rebellion exposes some of the weaknesses in class structure. There's a really good crash course that goes over Bacon's Rebellion that would be helpful to watch. The colonies rebel as a result of the acts. They break away and they have to find a new form of government, so they fight the American Revolution. So that's another change. All right, we're going to go to causes and effects. I start with the event and then I spiral into the cause and effect. Okay, so the event or change is the adoption of the Constitution that was caused by the work of the Enlightenment political philosophers. And in the short term, it was caused because the Articles of Confederation created a haphazard association of states that performed poorly. The effect of the adoption of the Constitution in the short term is that it provides a structure for our new government. In the long term, it's the longest standing democracy in the world, which we should be pretty proud of. The Constitution is a pretty great document. It works pretty well for us. Okay, another event is the rise of political parties. This is going to be really, really important. The long-term cause of that is differing ideas about the strength of the central government. The short-term cause is disagreement among specific politicians. Alexander Hamilton and Thomas Jefferson are going to kind of cause that, right? The rise of political parties effects, the short-term effect, the election of 1800 is the first time that actual campaigning happened, which makes it really significant. The long-term effect, the U.S. has developed into a two-party system through campaigning and subsequently fundraising. All right, now we're on comparison. So some things you can compare and contrast. You can compare and contrast the presidency of John Adams with the presidency of Thomas Jefferson. You can compare and contrast the Articles of Confederation with the Constitution, which we did. You can compare and contrast the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists, which we did, and you can compare and contrast the Whiskey Rebellion with Shays Rebellion. Okay, let's talk about the big ideas. You ready? Okay, here we go. Let's see if I can figure out a way to get the sun out of my eyes. There we go. All right, maybe that's a little better. Okay. Yeah, okay. So time period 3, the big ideas, the acts, the various acts, all those things. We did a foldable on it. The French and Indian War as a turning point. The Articles of Confederation, Shays Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion, the Constitutional Convention, the Northwest Ordinance, the Federalists versus the Anti-Federalists, and the Alien and Sedition Acts. Okay? So those are the big ideas. You guys, I want to figure out a way for us to do like a text chat. So that you guys can kind of come to Teams and you can ask me specific questions that you might have. But I don't have a great form for that, and I don't want to overwhelm you at this point. So I'm open to suggestions for that. But at this point, if you guys have specific questions about this, please feel free to text me on Remind. That's probably the best way to get in touch with me, because once I sort of am done with my office hours in the morning, which goes from 7:30 to 9. Once I'm done with those office hours, I really don't get the computer again, but I have my phone kind of in my hand. So I'm able to get in touch with you on Remind very easily, but the rest of the stuff is not amazing for me because I have 5 other people that are taking their turns using the computer and the Wi-Fi. So I hope this is helping. I hope you guys are doing okay with it. Sorry about the tardiness of this review video. Obviously, the due dates are all suggestions at this point. Just do the best you can doing the work. Do the best you can turning the work in. And reach out to me if you need me. I'll talk to you all soon. Bye.